When Evelyn Lin opened her eyes, applause was crashing around her like waves striking glass. Crystal chandeliers covered the ceiling of the Celestine Hotel ballroom. Honey-colored light spilled over the stage and flashed off a long row of gold bars arranged inside a deep red glass display case. On the giant LED screen behind them, her name and Adrian Zheng's shone in scrolling gold letters. The engagement of Adrian Zheng and Evelyn Lin. For one first stunned second, Evelyn thought she was dreaming. In the second after that, she felt the stems of her champagne roses digging into her palm, felt her nails biting her own skin, and knew this was no dream at all. She had come back to the day of her engagement to Adrian Zheng, the man she had once believed was her fate and who had ultimately pushed her and her family into hell. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" Adrian's voice slid past her ear, smooth as a blade wrapped in velvet. "You're not shocked, are you?" He was wearing a white suit, a diamond pin at his lapel, that beautiful, practiced smile on his face, the kind of smile that persuaded strangers he was a man hopelessly in love. Once she had been fooled by it too. That had been before she learned what he really was. The memory came back in one violent sweep. After this engagement, the so-called gift of 1,000 taels of gold would turn out to be counterfeit, plated shells over cheap alloy cores. Adrian and his family would use the spectacle of the gift to pull traffic toward their jewelry livestream business. More importantly, they would use her name, the only daughter of Daniel Lin, one of the city's most trusted precious metal appraisers, as a living certificate of authenticity. When the scandal finally exploded, Adrian would put everything on her. He would say she had inspected the gold. He would say she had known it was fake. He would say the Lin family had colluded in fraud. Her father would collapse from rage and humiliation in his own office. Her mother would try to hold everything together until she fainted at her husband's funeral. Evelyn herself would be cursed online until she no longer dared step outside. And on the final night of her previous life, Adrian would lock her in one of his storage warehouses and force her to sign papers taking full responsibility. Then the warehouse would burn. She remembered the smell of melting plastic, the iron taste of smoke, the freezing touch of the locked steel door. And now she was here again, in front of the fake gold, beside the man who had destroyed her family without ever raising a gun. "Future sister-in-law, what are you staring at?" A phone was suddenly thrust close to her face. The live stream camera was already on. Mandy Zhang, Adrian's younger sister, stood there in bright red lipstick, her eyes glittering with the same familiar malice Evelyn remembered. "You've probably never seen this much gold in your life, right?" That line. It was exactly the same. In her previous life, Evelyn had only smiled awkwardly and tried to preserve the dignity of both families. Later, the clip had been edited into a sneering little viral video. Even the appraiser's daughter goes wide-eyed at gold.
This time, she slowly lifted her head and looked directly into the lens. "You're right," she said with a calm smile. "A gift this large deserves a public inspection." Mandy's expression froze. Adrian's smile flickered too, just once, just barely. No one else would have seen it, but Evelyn had loved him long enough once to learn every mask he wore. The MC was still speaking in an excited voice. "And now the groom-to-be, Mr. Adrian Zheng, will present his fiancée with a symbol of enduring love, 1,000 taels of pure gold. Please wait." The entire ballroom fell silent. Evelyn did not raise her voice, but every word landed clearly. "My family has worked in precious metal appraisal for 3 generations. In our family, gifts made of gold or gemstones are always verified on the spot for luck. I'm sure Adrian won't mind." Mandy jumped in immediately. "Oh, come on, Evelyn, you're being too serious. This is just my brother's sincerity." "Exactly," Evelyn cut in, her eyes never leaving Adrian. "If it's sincere, it should be easy to prove." Whispers began moving through the room. In the front row, Daniel Lin set down his teacup. His face became unreadably still. He was not a man who wasted words, but in the jewelry trade, everyone in Hong Kong knew what that silence meant. When Daniel Lin watched instead of speaking, something was wrong. Adrian forced a laugh. "You're right, of course. I just thought this was a happy occasion. It might be a shame to drag out the process." "It won't take long." Evelyn turned toward her father's longtime assistant. "Mr. Tron, could you bring in the field kit from the car?" He stood at once. He had followed her father for years. He understood immediately. Mandy went pale. "What are you trying to say? You don't trust our family?" "I trust enough to test," Evelyn replied pleasantly. "If I didn't, I would have called market regulators before the ceremony." The room tightened like a drawn wire. Mandy's phone was still live streaming. Comments were already racing up the screen. "Do it publicly. That makes sense. She's from an appraisal family. Why does the sister look scared?" From the corner of the ballroom, Evelyn caught sight of a man in a gray shirt leaning quietly against a pillar, watching the stage with composed eyes. Miles Fu. In her previous life, he had been the lawyer representing the Consumer Rights Association in the later case against the Zheng family. By then, Evelyn had already been too broken to face anyone, but she still remembered his voice in the investigation room. "If you want to overturn this, I'll help you, but first you have to stay alive." She had not stayed alive long enough. And now he was here, 2 years younger than in memory, still wearing that same impossible calm, as though he did not waste emotion on things that did not deserve it. Perhaps he had come as someone's guest. Perhaps fate had left him here for her. Mr. Tron returned with a black case. Inside were a handheld scale, a loop, testing stone, acid, and a portable density meter. A basic kit, but more than enough to expose an amateur deception. Adrian laughed again, thinner this time. "Is that really necessary?" "It's 1,000 taels of gold," Evelyn said lightly. "A little seriousness seems appropriate." She walked to the display case, pulled on gloves, and lifted one of the bars. The instant its weight settled into her hands, cold ran straight down her spine. In the warehouse fire of her previous life, Adrian had once slammed a bar down in front of her and shouted that if she signed the papers, he would spare her parents. That bar had felt cold and strangely heavy, too. She set the piece on the scale. The number appeared. Evelyn said nothing. She only turned to look at her father. Daniel Lin frowned. A real gold bar of this size should not weigh like that. Evelyn raised it to the light, studied the seam with a loupe, then took a fine probe and pressed it into a hidden corner at the base. A sliver of gold-colored skin lifted. Beneath it lay dull gray metal. The ballroom erupted. Mandy let out a shriek. "You scratched it on purpose!" Evelyn set the bar down with perfect calm. "That was only a surface test. If anyone wants confirmation, we can send it downstairs to the hotel's spectrometry lab right now. But in my profession, this is already enough." She lifted her gaze to the live stream camera. "This is not pure gold." Silence crashed over the room for half a heartbeat. Then everything broke at once. Guests rose from their seats. Phones were lifted. Cameras turned. Curiosity became judgment in a single breath. Her father stood. "Then the Zheng family," Daniel Lin said, his voice low and heavy as stone, "owes us an explanation." For the first time, Adrian lost his smile completely. There must have been a packaging mistake. A packaging mistake? 1,000 taels of pure gold, somehow mistaken for 1,000 taels of plated alloy? Are you calling my family stupid or the entire city? Mandy stammered. "My brother didn't know. It must have been the warehouse." Evelyn turned to her.
How interesting. A moment ago you were live streaming it in my face. You looked very confident. Are you telling me you never once looked at the goods before going live? Mandy's face flushed scarlet. Someone laughed from the back rows, then someone else. Adrian clenched his jaw. Evelyn, do you really have to make a scene today? Of course, in her previous life, he had said the same kind of thing, as if the person causing trouble were always her, never the one doing the deceiving. Evelyn stepped back, slipped the engagement ring off her finger, and laid it on the glass above the counterfeit bars. No, she said, you made the scene. I'm only clarifying it. Her eyes were steady. This engagement is over.
2. The ring on the glass. No one had expected her to remove the ring on the spot. Even Adrian Lin looked startled for one brief second. Then he rose and stood beside his daughter, his back straight as an old pine rooted in rock. Evelyn's mother, Lin, gentle by nature, soft in voice, did not hesitate either. She came forward and took Evelyn's hand in both of hers. "We're leaving," she said. Only 4 words. Adrian lunged forward as if to catch Evelyn's wrist, but Mr. Tran moved across his path first. He was not a man who talked much. He only had to stand there to become a wall. "Mr. Zheng," he said, "please keep your distance." "Evelyn!" Adrian's tone had lost all its polished courtesy now. "You have to let me explain." She turned back. For one short instant, she looked properly at the man she had once spent 3 years dreaming beside. Tall, charming, good-looking, skilled with every sweet word a woman wanted to hear. In her last life, she had blamed herself. She had thought she was foolish, naive, too slow to see what was happening. Standing here now, she understood the truth. She had not been stupid. Evil was simply patient, and ordinary people rarely train themselves to expect cruelty wrapped in tenderness. "Fine," she said coolly. "Tomorrow you may bring every purchase invoice, every assay certificate, every shipping document, and every fabrication contract connected to these 1,000 taels to my family's company. I'll give you one chance to explain, with evidence and under the law." At the word law, Adrian's face changed. The people around them started murmuring even harder, because this was no longer a lover's quarrel. If there had been fraud, if the false gift had been used as advertising, if it was tied to the Zheng family's jewelry livestream business, then this could pull an entire chain down with it. Mandy hurriedly killed the livestream, but it was far too late. Half the room had already recorded everything. Only then did Miles step away from the pillar and move closer to the stage. He did not interfere, he merely stood near enough to have heard every word. His eyes rested for a moment on the ring Evelyn had left on the glass. There was no pity in his gaze, no vulgar curiosity, only a kind of attentive calm that made her think, if something truly happens, this man will remember every important detail. She did not know why, but that steadiness made her heart feel a little less cold. When the family finally got into the car, Adrian Lin asked in a strained voice, "Have you really thought this through?" "I've been thinking it through for a long time," Evelyn said, leaning back against the seat. Her throat was raw. "This time, I can't afford to be wrong." Her father rode in the front without speaking, streetlights sliding over his face in alternating bands of gold and shadow. After a long silence, he said, "Tomorrow, I'm having my people review every recent transaction between the Zheng family and their partners. If they dared stage something like this in public, they wanted more than a grand engagement gift." He was right. In her last life, it had taken Evelyn over a year to discover that the Zhangs had been in financial trouble long before the engagement. Their online jewelry chain only looked successful. Under the surface, it was beautiful branding wrapped around chaotic cash flow. They needed the Lin family's reputation as a seal of trust. By engaging her, parading 1,000 taels of gold, and dressing her as the future daughter-in-law of a glittering jewelry empire, they could pull viewers,
orders, and investors all at once. One arrow, many targets. She closed her eyes. Her fingers were freezing. Her mother stroked her hair gently. "Don't be afraid. Your father and I are here." That sentence made the bridge of her nose sting. In her previous life, she had not managed to keep those words with her for long. This time, she would. Back home, Evelyn locked herself in her room and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. The woman in the glass was only 26. Her skin was still smooth. Her shoulders had not yet been bent by scandal and grief. There were no hollows under her eyes. And yet something dark already lived in that gaze, something only a person who had died once would ever carry. Her phone vibrated without stopping. Friends, business partners, reporters, acquaintances, unknown numbers. She answered none of them. She opened social media instead. The engagement clip was already spreading everywhere. Some people praised her composure. Some mocked the Zheng family. Some insisted the whole thing must have been staged by both sides for traffic. There had never been a shortage of people willing to doubt the truth simply because reality had arrived too dramatically for their taste. Then she stopped scrolling. Under a reposted clip, an account named miles.fu had commented, "Seal the physical evidence, preserve the original live stream, pull the hotel cameras, request contracts for display arrangement, and a list of everyone who had access to the gift before the ceremony. If they want to explain themselves, they can explain with evidence." Short, precise, correct. Her lips moved before she even knew she was smiling. A direct message appeared from the same account almost immediately. "I'm Miles Fu. I was at the hotel tonight as a guest of one of my clients. I recorded part of the event from before you requested the inspection. If you need it, I can send the original file." Evelyn stared at the message for a while. Then she typed back, "I do need it. Thank you." His reply came almost at once. "I'll send the raw file and a cloud backup. Don't trust anyone who offers to explain privately. From now on, leave a trace for everything." She hesitated, then wrote, "You sound as if you've met a lot of men like Adrian Zheng." This time he took nearly 30 seconds to answer. "No, I've simply met a great many people who thought they could outsmart consequences." The message was cold, but bright. For the first time since waking up inside this reborn night, Evelyn felt some of the chaos inside her mind settle. She opened her bedside drawer and took out a brown leather notebook. After the disaster in her previous life, she had stopped writing anything down at all. Now she needed somewhere to anchor her sanity. On the first page, she wrote, "Things I must do. 1. Protect my parents. 2. Cut all ties with the Zheng family. 3. Find evidence of the counterfeits and the money trail. 4. Never believe an apology. 5. Never go soft." Then she paused and added a 6th line, 6. Stay alive to the end.
3. The scratch under the gold bar. The next morning, the doors of Verity Gold Appraisal opened earlier than usual. The company occupied the 3rd floor of an old building not far from Ankung's jewelry district. The sign outside was modest, almost old-fashioned, but in the trade it commanded respect. Daniel Lin always said that in a profession built around gold and gemstones, the thing that had to shine brightest was never the signboard. It was reputation. Today, that reputation had been dragged into a storm. By 8 o'clock, several reporters were already waiting downstairs. Daniel let none of them in. He only instructed his secretary to say, "The company is cooperating in the verification of the items displayed at last night's engagement. We will make a formal statement when we have formal results." Adrian did not come. Instead, the Zheng family sent their lawyer, a warehouse manager, and a young accountant whose hands were trembling so hard she could barely keep hold of the folders she carried. Evelyn sat at the meeting table with her laptop open in front of her, a recorder visibly turned on at her side. Her parents sat opposite. Miles was there too, invited by her father after Daniel had reviewed the messages and video he had sent the night before. When Miles entered the room, the junior secretary at the front desk visibly slowed for half a step. He was not a dazzling man. He did not draw attention by force. Dark blue shirt, steel watch, neatly cut hair, clean bearing, quiet posture. What people noticed, if they noticed anything at all, was the calm in his eyes, a calm that suggested he did not spend emotion on nonsense. The Lin family had retained him as temporary outside legal counsel. He had agreed almost immediately. "If you want to handle this cleanly," he had said, "start with proper procedure." The meeting had barely begun when the Zheng family lawyer spoke first. "My clients deeply regret yesterday's unfortunate incident. We believe an error may have occurred during transport or stage arrangement involving the items displayed." "Excuse me," Miles cut in. "I need to correct one phrase. If an item publicly presented as 1,000 taels of pure gold is not in fact pure gold, then this is not a minor display incident. It is a materially false representation with potentially serious consequences." The lawyer choked on the rest of his sentence. Evelyn slid a printed packet across the table. "These are close photographs of the base seam. These are thermal images taken at several points. These are the preliminary density readings. Together they indicate a thin gold exterior over a different metal core." The warehouse manager rushed in. "But we didn't directly commission the bars. An outside workshop could have deceived us." "What workshop?" Daniel asked. The man went silent. The young accountant beside him clutched the hem of her skirt so tightly the fabric wrinkled in her fist. Evelyn had noticed from the beginning that every time someone asked about documentation, the girl glanced toward the lawyer as if begging to be rescued. Miles opened his laptop and projected video onto the screen. "This is the footage I recorded last night beginning at 6:42 p.m. In the clip, Mr. Zheng's sister is live streaming and explicitly introducing the gift as the 1,000 taels of gold my brother prepared for his future sister-in-law. That means the Zheng family fully understood that the item would be publicly presented as a real gift, not as anonymous decoration." The warehouse manager's face darkened. The lawyer fought to keep his tone gentle. "We are not denying that a mistake occurred, but we hope both families can resolve this discreetly. There was, after all, a marriage arrangement involved." "There is no marriage arrangement," Evelyn said. "I understand." The lawyer gave a strange smile. "I only mean that there was affection between the families. If this escalates too far, public opinion may harm both sides." Daniel Lin let out a humorless laugh. "You brought counterfeit goods to my daughter's engagement and planned to use her name as a living advertisement," he said, setting one hand flat on the table. "Then, after being caught, you talked to me about damage to both sides. Do you think I'm afraid of public opinion? The thing I fear most is silence in front of a fake." The room went still. Then the young accountant suddenly burst into tears. I'm sorry." Every head turned toward her. The lawyer snapped, "Control yourself." Too late. Some people simply were not built to carry pressure for long. All it took was one direct gaze in the right place, and the seam split. "I didn't know it would become this big," she sobbed. "At first, Mr. Zheng told me to adjust the inventory figures so the books would match. He said the sample pieces and the real pieces were only being swapped for display. Then he told me to tag the entire sample lot under one code and said it would all be changed after the ceremony." Miles lifted his pen. "The entire sample lot?" She nodded, white-faced. "How much?"
It wasn't only the 1,000 taels last night. There are also live-stream jewelry samples labeled 24 karat that aren't actually that purity. The Zhang lawyer jumped to his feet. I demand that this meeting be suspended. No, Miles said. She is speaking voluntarily. The recording is in plain view. If you want the session stopped, state a legitimate legal ground. The meeting room felt like glass stretched to breaking. Evelyn looked at the accountant, not with triumph, but with something more complicated. In her previous life, she too had been trapped inside fear, had known things were wrong, and still not been able to escape them. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked softly. "Nora," the girl whispered. "Nora, tell us everything you know. If you cooperate now, there may still be a way back for you." The tears came harder, but so did the words. The outside workshop, internal warehouse codes, sample jewelry switched during live streams, beauty influencers who had been sent custom-made, real gold pieces for one-time promotion. Each detail spilled into the room like more bars dropping from a broken crate. The more they heard, the colder Daniel's face became. Anna Lin sat without speaking, fingers clenched so hard around the beads in her hand, her knuckles turned white. Miles took notes at frightening speed, stopping only when necessary to clarify a date, a code, a chain of custody. Watching him, Evelyn understood exactly why he was good at this. He did not let anger drive. He let structure build the truth until the truth could stand by itself. The meeting ended with a signed record preserving everything the Zheng representatives had brought, together with a formal request to seal the relevant warehouses. Out in the hallway, Nora looked half dead with shock. Evelyn followed and called her name. The girl turned, eyes swollen red. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Nora stammered. "But you helped them do it," Evelyn said plainly. Nora lowered her head and cried harder. Evelyn stood quiet for a few seconds before speaking again. "If you want to make any of this right, don't disappear. Cooperate all the way through." Nora looked up at her stunned, as if she had expected only hatred, never a path. At the far end of the corridor, Miles stood by a window with sunlight hitting the edge of his glasses in a thin line. "You're softer than I expected," he said when Evelyn came back toward him. "You thought I'd slap her?" "No," he shook his head. "I thought you'd hate everyone dragged in by that family." Evelyn looked out toward the street below. "I used to think that if people did wrong, they should pay at once. But some people are swept into other people's wrongdoing because they're weak. Keeping them on this side is more useful than pushing them back to the other one." One of his brows lifted very slightly, as if he had heard something deeper inside the word used, but he did not press. "You're thinking clearly," he said. "Victories fueled by emotion don't last. We need the kind that comes with records, signatures, and cameras." Her mouth tilted. "How romantic." "It's only professional." He paused. "But if you prefer, I can call it an adult form of romance." For the first time since coming back to life, Evelyn laughed for real. 4. A debt from the previous life. That afternoon, Evelyn accompanied her father to her grandfather's old house on the outskirts of the city. The house was not large, but one room had been kept entirely for family records. Handwritten assay books, photographs of old jewelry pieces, historic certificates, and even pages of practical lessons her grandfather had copied in violet ink about how to work honestly in the trade. In her previous life, that room had been locked after her father fell ill. She had never had the courage to open it. This time she turned the key herself. The smell of old paper drifted out, dry, warm, faintly sweet. The files were stacked in neat order, as if time itself had never been torn. Her father took down a small iron box and handed it to her. "I had planned to give you this when you got married," he said. Inside lay a plain old gold ring, simple design. On the inner band, tiny engraved words, "Keep the fire, keep the heart." "Your grandmother's wedding ring," Daniel said. "Before she died, she said that if one day you met a man who was truly sincere, you could pass it on. If you met someone unworthy, then keep it for yourself." Evelyn held the ring in her palm and felt an odd heat gather there. Her father looked at her for a long time. "When you removed Adrian Zheng's ring yesterday, your eyes didn't look like the eyes of a girl who had just broken off an engagement," he said quietly. "They looked like the eyes of someone who had just escaped death." Her heart missed a beat. Daniel Lin had never been an especially delicate man, but decades of appraisal had sharpened something inside him. He could look at metal and tell weight from worth. He could often look at people and do something similar. "Dad?" "If there's something you can't say yet, I won't force you." He dusted one of the wooden shells with an absent motion. "But from now on, you're not allowed to carry everything by yourself." That landed precisely where she hurt most. In her previous life, she had hidden too much because she wanted desperately to prove she had chosen the right man and become a capable adult. She hid Adrian's murky invoices. She hid the times he borrowed her name to meet investors. She told herself she could handle it alone. She had handled it with her life. "Dad," she said, closing her fingers around her grandmother's ring, "if I told you I kept dreaming that terrible things would happen, would you believe me?" He did not answer at once. He only pulled out a chair and sat down. "When I was your age, your grandfather once brought home an antique object. It looked fake at first glance. Every surface sign suggested it was a later reproduction, but I insisted it was real." He looked at her. "When I held it, the cold felt different. In the end, I was right, not because I was magical, because in this line of work, if you spend long enough with details, your instincts begin storing things your mouth can't always explain."
He exhaled slowly. "You don't need to tell me what you dreamed. Just trust your instincts sooner from now on." In that dusty room with sunlight floating through the air, Evelyn nearly cried. At that moment, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You think taking off the ring means you won? It isn't over yet." No signature. It did not need one. Mandy. Evelyn stared at the screen, feeling the old cold rise in her again. Mandy had always been more dangerous than her vulgar brightness suggested. She had resented Evelyn from the start, not because Evelyn was taking her brother, but because the Lin family was, in Mandy's eyes, a red carpet for her own family to walk on. The first person to pour oil on the fire in Evelyn's last life had been Mandy. Without replying, Evelyn took a screenshot and sent it straight to Miles. His answer arrived in under a minute. "Save it, don't answer. Threatening messages are gifts if you preserve them properly." She laughed under her breath. "You use words strangely," she typed back. "Because bad people rarely know when they're giving presents," he replied. That evening, he invited her to a tea lounge on the rooftop of a building across from the jewelry district. The place was quiet, the lighting low and warm, the beginning of season wind moving softly through gauze curtains. He brought a file. "Debt," he said. "Whose?" "Prosper Gold's." He opened the pages one by one. Over the past 6 months, the Zheng family company has been using inventory as collateral for revolving loans. The problem is that the inventory figures they reported are beautiful, too beautiful. Evelyn flipped through the documents quickly. Her pupils tightened. A few item codes were wrong at a glance. Reported purity levels were higher than the company had historically sold. Quantities exceeded the workshop capacity of the factories supposedly producing the pieces. "Where did you get these?" she asked.
From lawful channels and professional relationships. He took a sip of tea. I don't touch dirty evidence, but I assume you can already see the problem. They're inflating inventory to borrow money. Exactly. And if yesterday's 1,000 taels had been accepted as a symbol of their brand's strength, attracting new small investors would have become much easier. A lavish engagement can make people forget to read financial statements. She went still. In her previous life, Adrian had once casually mentioned plans to expand their live stream operations into neighboring provinces. At the time, she had mistaken that for ambition. Now she understood. He simply wanted to use her remaining reputation before it collapsed completely. Miles closed the file. I have a question. Ask. How did you react so fast last night? His eyes were direct. Most people cannot switch from being at their own engagement ceremony to collecting evidence in the middle of it. She looked at him. With anyone else, she might have dodged, but sitting across from Miles, she had the distinct feeling that lies would only make her heavier. I don't know how to say this without sounding insane, she admitted, tracing the rim of her teacup, but I had an overwhelming certainty that if I hesitated one step too long, I would lose everything. He did not laugh. He did not pity her. He only asked, "What else are you certain of?" That they won't stop at the counterfeit engagement gift. She lifted her eyes. They'll try to turn me into the responsible party. He nodded as if that were entirely reasonable. Then we move before they do. We? One eyebrow rose. If you prefer, I can revise that to you and I pursuing separate lines of work toward the same objective. She laughed. Do you always talk like that? No, only with clients who enjoy challenging my phrasing. You knew I was doing that? I'm a lawyer, he said mildly. I make a living by taking the temperature of language. A breeze stirred the tea and sent one neat ripple across the surface. Evelyn looked at the man in front of her and thought, against her will, if I had met him earlier in my previous life, would fate have changed? Then she stopped herself. A person given another chance should not drown in regret for roads already gone. What she had now was the present, and right now he was here with her, pulling at one clean thread in a knot of lies. Fine, then we move before they do.
5. The Man in the Gray Shirt. For the next 3 days, Khan talked about nothing except the counterfeit 1,000 taels. Rumors traveled faster than traffic. Some said that Zheng family was finished. Some said the Lin family had staged the entire scandal to break the engagement cleanly. Some dug up Mandy's old live streams and zoomed in on pieces she had once sworn were full purity, fully certified. Some former customers began commenting that the gold color on pieces they had bought had faded suspiciously fast. Economic investigators and market regulators started paying attention. The Zhang family tried to rescue themselves in every possible direction. Adrian posted a long apology describing the matter as a display incident and promising refunds to anyone who felt uneasy. The wording backfired immediately. Once he admitted there had been a display problem, he had already admitted the display had been false. Mandy went feral online. She hinted that the Lin family looked down on their future in-laws. She called Evelyn arrogant. She accused her of being educated but loveless. Every sentence landed like oil on fire. Evelyn said nothing. Having lived through one full ruin already, she understood that public arguments only scattered garbage farther. What she needed were documents, witnesses, records, and timing. On the 4th afternoon, Miles took her to meet a woman named Tessa Song, the owner of a fabrication workshop that had once done jobs for the Zhang family. The workshop lay deep inside an aging industrial park. From the outside, it looked like any other metalworking unit. Tessa was in her 30s, with cropped hair, high cheekbones, and the careful expression of someone used to surviving in narrow alleys and darker deals. I'll say this once.
After that, don't come back and drag me into trouble, Tessa said, lighting a cigarette under the corrugated awning as thunder built somewhere above. All right, Evelyn said. Tessa exhaled smoke in a thin stream. The Zhangs asked me to make shell casings for display bars. I refused the core casting because it smelled wrong. They took that elsewhere. But before they switched workshops, Adrian Zheng drank tea with me and said very clearly that all he needed was for it to look good on camera. Real or fake didn't matter. Evelyn's fingers tightened. That confirmation was crucial. "Do you have proof?" Miles asked. "I'm not stupid enough to record conversations like that," Tessa said dryly, "but I still have the messages requesting the shells and the design files for the outer casing, time-stamped." Miles asked several more technical questions, then requested a full on-site backup of the messages in their presence. Tessa agreed after signing an initial identity protection statement. When they left the workshop, rain had begun. They ran beneath the narrow shelter of a convenience store. Early summer rain in Ancon always came hard and sudden, slapping the dust out of the road before sweeping it away as if the heat had never existed. "You all right?" Miles asked. "I'm fine." But she clearly wasn't, because he looked at her for a long beat, then simply pointed to the vending machine. "What do you want?" "Canned coffee." "It's raining." "So? Bad for your stomach." Evelyn laughed. "Are you a lawyer or a doctor?"
A man who doesn't want his client collapsing halfway through. He bought her hot tea instead. "Use this." She accepted the can. The metal was warm against her hands, unlike the cold still threading through her bones. "Are you always this calm?" she asked quietly. Miles leaned back against a post and watched the rain. "No, I've lost control before." "Over what?" He was silent for a few seconds. "My father once invested in a friend's building materials company," he said. "The friend falsified the books and pulled in everyone who trusted him. My family didn't lose as much money as some others, but my father lost faith in people. He got sick not long after. Since then, I have very little patience for people who believe they're smarter than consequences." Evelyn looked at the side of his face in the silver rain and caught a glimpse of something soft he kept hidden most of the time. "I'm sorry," she said. "No need. I'm telling you so you understand why I dislike the word oversight." She nodded. Perhaps the crack inside him was why he could read the cracks in others so accurately. Her phone suddenly buzzed. A video had arrived by email from an anonymous sender through the company address. Security footage from the alley behind the Zheng family estate. In the clip, on the night before the engagement, several men loaded crates into a small truck. The tarp lifted for a moment, exposing the exact shell casing mark Tessa had just confirmed. Evelyn showed the screen to Miles. He studied it once and said immediately, "Send me the file. Don't open it on any other device. I want the metadata preserved." "Who do you think sent it?" "Someone inside the Zhang family who wants an escape route," he said. Then his tone darkened. "Or someone who hates them even more than you do." A face flashed briefly through Evelyn's mind. Not Mandy, she was too impulsive. Not Nora, the girl did not seem to have access to household security systems. Claire Zhang then? Adrian's mother? In Evelyn's previous life, Claire had almost never struck directly. She smiled, she soothed, she let other people do the dirty work. A woman like that would be the first to start throwing cargo overboard when the ship began to sink. The rain softened. Miles opened his umbrella. "I'll take you home." "That's not necessary. I can—" "You are currently hated by a family in active panic," he said. "I do not encourage clients to travel alone under those conditions." "You always call me your client." "At present, you are my client." He glanced at her, the faintest curve touching his mouth.
If that role changes, I'll update the form of address." She stopped for half a second. He said it and then walked out into the rain as if he had said nothing unusual at all. She moved beneath the umbrella beside him, listening to the small drumming of rain on black fabric. The distance between them was neither intimate nor formal, close enough for her to catch the faint woody scent at his collar. A strange feeling entered her then, not dramatic, not urgent, only like the arrival of a glass of warm water after a long night spent in fire.
6. The small knife behind the mirror wall. That night, just after Miles's car turned out of the Lin family's residential lane, Evelyn received a call from a landline number. A familiar woman's voice flowed out, soft as silk over steel. "Evelyn, dear, it's Adrian's mother, Claire Zhang." Evelyn slowed on the stone path through the garden. The early osmanthus blossoms smelled heavy in the warm dark, but the instant she heard Claire's voice, she was back in another life, breathing the cloying perfume that had filled her mother's hospital room when Claire came to visit, cried a few elegant tears, and quietly probed how much of the Lin family's assets were still salvageable. "Is there something you need?" Evelyn asked. "I'd like to see you alone," Claire sighed delicately. "Young people do impulsive things. Adults need to talk them through properly. I've always thought of you like a daughter." That line nearly made Evelyn laugh aloud. "There's no need," she said. "Anything further can go through lawyers." "Evelyn," Claire's voice dropped lower, sweeter, "there are things lawyers may not tell you." Evelyn stopped walking. "Such as?" "Such as an old shipment of your father's whose origin wasn't entirely clean. Such as the truth that in this industry every family has shadows. If you make this ugly, it may not be only my family that ends up uncomfortable." Exactly her style. Claire never stabbed openly. She hid a small knife behind a wall of mirrors and let people cut themselves while trying to look carefully. In her previous life, Evelyn had been terrified of half-spoken threats like this. She had always worried her parents might have secrets she did not know, worried that if she pushed too hard, something else would be dragged out and used against them. This time she was not afraid. "Then please send all your materials directly to the economic investigators," she said lightly. "If they're real, my family will cooperate. If they're fabricated, I hope you'll enjoy the consequences." The line went silent. Claire had not expected that level of calm. "You've changed," she said at last, the sweetness thinning. "Everyone changes," Evelyn replied with a faint smile, "especially after they finally see what other people really are." She hung up. The next morning, Verity Gold Appraisal received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a 3-year-old goods intake form with several vague lines circled in red, clearly meant to suggest that Daniel Lin had once accepted a substandard shipment of gold. Her father looked at it and snorted. "Old trick." He opened the office safe and pulled out the original file. The photocopy had omitted the final page, the one clearly stating that the shipment had failed appraisal and rejected the same day. "She's testing whether we'll panic," Daniel said. "We won't," Evelyn answered. He looked at her for a moment, expression unreadable. "You are really different." Different because she had already died once. But she only smiled and said nothing. At noon, Miles arrived with new information. From the security video metadata, he had identified the source as an internal administrator profile connected to the Zheng family estate system. In other words, the anonymous sender had access to the household at a fairly high level. "Claire?" Evelyn guessed. "Most likely." He placed his laptop on the table. "She's putting Adrian and Mandy forward as shock absorbers. If the company sinks, she intends to keep whatever separate assets she can. That sounds exactly like her. You know her well. Evelyn's chest tightened. I was stupid enough once that I had to learn the price of that stupidity thoroughly. Miles said nothing. He only slid a glass of warm water toward her. It was such a small gesture, yet somehow it settled her more than any reassurance would have. This afternoon there's an order to inspect one of Prosper Gold's secondary warehouses, he said. Do you want to come? Yes. The warehouse sat at the edge of the city, near the ring road. When the roller door opened, a wave of metal, cardboard, and packaging plastic smell rolled out. At first glance, everything looked orderly, but for people in the trade, false order had its own scent. That row, Evelyn said at once, pointing. The labels say 24 karat, but the seals are the kind cheap costume jewelry wholesalers use. A market regulation officer immediately photographed it. Deeper inside, the inspection team found trays of jewelry split neatly into two categories, for camera, for actual delivery. The camera pieces were brighter, heavier, and more visually convincing. The actual readings from the testing devices, however, came back wrong. In one corner of the warehouse stood a complete live stream setup, lights, backdrop, product stands, alongside instruction notes for employees. If customer asks too many technical questions, promise certificate later. Shift blame to separate workshop label. Emphasize lifetime warranty. Looking at the setup, Evelyn suddenly remembered the studio from her previous life, remembered smiling like a fool beside Adrian after a successful sale event. How long had he been using her image? From when? From the very beginning? Nora was there too, brought in to help identify internal item codes. Her eyes were swollen. When one locked steel case was dragged out, she sucked in a sharp breath. Inside were files on high-value customers and a list titled Priority Approach Targets. At the top were Evelyn's name and Daniel Lin's. Below them were several familiar names from the local business community. They wanted to use you as the real gateway, Evelyn whispered. Evelyn looked down at the list and felt something cold lodge in her throat. In her previous life, she blamed fate for being cruel. Now she understood something harsher. Fate was never as cruel as people who knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. Then, from the rear of the warehouse came a crash. One of the Cheng family's former employees had tried to run. Officers rushed to block him. In the shoving, a carton tipped open and burst open across the concrete floor. Dozens of gold-plated bars spilled out. Under the warehouse lights, they shone brilliantly, so brilliantly that the falseness itself seemed obscene. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. The scene felt like a confession too blatant to deny. Miles stood beside Evelyn and said in a very low voice, "There's no coming back from this now." She looked at the fake bars rolling across the floor and was surprised by what she felt. Not joy, relief. Relief that at last the truth had taken visible shape and was no longer a nightmare known only to her.
7. My name is not your shield. The warehouse inspection hit the news, and Adrian disappeared from social media almost immediately. Prosper Gold's flagship store closed for inventory review. Former employees began posting anonymously in online groups about unpaid wages. The internet smelled blood. That evening, Adrian finally came to the Lin family home. He no longer wore polished suits. He was in a wrinkled black shirt, his eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. When the housekeeper announced him, Evelyn was with her mother in the study. Anna Lin squeezed her daughter's hand. "If you don't want to see him, your father will have him sent away." "I'll see him," Evelyn said, rising, "one last time." Miles had arrived only moments earlier to discuss the case further. Hearing that, he asked only one thing. "Do you want me nearby or out of sight?" "Nearby."
In the sitting room, Adrian stood in the center like an animal driven into a corner. The instant he saw her, he took 2 fast steps forward, but Miles moved smoothly into the space between them. The gesture was not aggressive, it was simply final. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked. "Evelyn, listen to me." Adrian's voice was hoarse. "No one wanted this to get this far. I admit mistakes were made, but not all of them were mine. My mother, Mandy, the operations team." Evelyn looked at him and felt, strangely, nothing but clarity. In her previous life, a bowed head like this would have softened her. But once you had seen the bottom of the mud, crocodile tears no longer resembled pain. "Did you come to apologize or to assign blame?" she asked. He swallowed. "I came to ask you to save me." There it was. Not forgiveness, not explanation. Rescue. Adrian took another step, desperation fraying his face. "Evelyn, you know what this means if it goes to full litigation. I'm finished. All you have to do is say you reacted in anger that night and made a premature conclusion. Just say the warehouse goods don't represent the entire company. That buys me time. I swear after this—" "After this?" Evelyn laughed once, softly. "After this, you were planning to do what? Use my name to deceive more people?" "That's not fair," he snapped, then forced himself calmer. "I know you hate me. Fine, I accept that. But you can't be this heartless." "Heartless?" she repeated. "You brought fake gold to our engagement, live-streamed me for publicity, and tried to use my family as a human billboard. And now I'm heartless?" His hands clenched. "You've changed." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I changed the moment I understood that in your eyes my name was never the name of a woman you loved. It was a shield." For one instant, his whole expression hardened. A direct hit. People like Adrian feared nothing more than being named correctly. "Don't force me," he said quietly, and the old threatening note finally entered his voice. "If I fall, don't assume your family will come out perfectly clean." Only then did Miles speak. "Mr. Zheng, every threat made in front of witnesses can be preserved and added to the record." Adrian turned and properly recognized him for the first time. His face changed again. "So this is your doing?" "No," Miles replied. "I simply stand where the truth stands. At the moment, it happens not to be standing with you."
Adrian gritted his teeth and looked from one to the other. Jealousy, rage, humiliation, helplessness. Evelyn had seen that exact mix before in the warehouse on the night she died. Then it had frozen her with fear. Now it only disgusted her. "I see," he said with a twisted laugh. "The engagement barely ended, and you've already found a replacement." Anna Lin shot to her feet in fury, but Evelyn raised a hand, stopping her. She stepped closer to Adrian and said each word clearly. "A man like you sees everything through the lowest possible lens because you can't imagine anything larger than your own appetites. He," she glanced at Miles, "at least does not use women as camouflage for greed." The room went rigid. Adrian stared at her as if he could not believe she would say such a thing aloud. Then his mouth twisted. "Fine, just wait." He turned and left. Only when the gate closed behind him did Evelyn realize the back of her blouse was damp with sweat. However much stronger she was than before, facing him directly still felt like pressing a hand to an old scar. Her mother came to wrap an arm around her shoulders. "You did very well." From the doorway, her father said simply, "We increase security tomorrow." Miles stood still for a moment, then asked, "Do you want his threat included in the file?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good." Later, after the others had gone, Evelyn stepped out onto the balcony to breathe. The sky was ink black.
The city beyond still glowed with signs and lights that had not yet gone dark. A light jacket settled over her shoulders. She turned. "Miles, you haven't left?" "I was waiting for you to stop shaking." "Do I look that shaken?" "No." He leaned beside her against the railing. "You look like someone who has just used all her strength to remain standing." Night wind moved through the trees below. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she said very quietly, "I used to be terrified of him." He did not ask why. He did not ask since when. He only said, "Being afraid is nothing to be ashamed of. Turning back to face it is what deserves respect." She looked at him. The light along his jaw made his face look at once severe and warm in a way she could never fully explain. "If one day," she said slowly, "I've hidden something even stranger than all of this from you, will you think I'm insane?" "It depends. On what?" "If what you've hidden helps you recognize danger sooner than other people do," he said, "then I'll call it unusual data, not madness." She laughed, and suddenly her eyes stung. This man always seemed to know how to pull her back from the edge without ever making her feel weak. "Thank you," she said. He tilted his head. "As I've mentioned, you are presently my client." "Yes," she smiled, "but you may be the first client-facing professional who's made me think this life still contains decent people." He fell silent for one beat, then looked straight at her. "Don't say this life as if you've lived several." Her heart stumbled, but the corner of his mouth lifted so faintly that she knew he was half teasing. "Even if you had lived several," he added, "you should remember one thing. Kindness does not save bad people. It only saves the ones who are still worth saving."
8. The Night of Fire in Memory. 2 weeks later, the case file had grown into 3 thick binders. Parts of Prosper Gold's operations had been temporarily suspended pending investigation. Several sales accounts were frozen. Reports of unpaid wages, low-purity goods, and meaningless warranties kept surfacing one after another like a fuse line catching fire. Mandy still fought online, but the more she talked, the more she exposed herself. At one point, she live-streamed while crying and insisted her family had been framed. Viewers immediately cut in the old clip of her shoving a phone into Evelyn's face at the engagement. The internet was not always fair, but once it smelled hypocrisy, it bit faster than the press. Claire quietly started selling off a few properties held in her own name. Adrian vanished almost completely. That silence made Evelyn uneasy. Her previous life had contained a silence like this too. Before everything had finally collapsed on top of her, Adrian had gone quiet for nearly half a month. Then he had appeared at her house with a broken, pleading expression and asked her to go with him to a warehouse to check the last remaining shipment. She had believed him. Then she had died there. One night, Evelyn dreamed of fire again. The steel door locked from outside, the stink of burning plastic, the phone vibrating uselessly in her pocket, Adrian's voice somewhere in the smoke. Sign it, and I'll save you." She woke in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat. 1 minute later, her phone lit. Unknown number. "If you want to know who was really behind the 1,000 taels, come to the old warehouse on Ring Road 3 tomorrow at 11, alone." Her blood turned to ice. Ring Road 3. The exact warehouse district where she had died before. She sat frozen for a long time. Then she took a screenshot and sent it to Miles. He called immediately. "Don't go," he said. His first words were iron. "I know. Are you shaking?" "Yes." Silence for a moment.
Then his voice softened. "I'm coming over." When he arrived, she was curled on a sofa in the smaller downstairs sitting room, holding a mug of hot water in both hands. He stepped in, saw how pale she was, and stopped short. "I'm sorry," she said first. "I thought I was steadier than this." He sat opposite her and did not rush to ask questions. He only pushed a box of tissues toward her. It was such a small thing that it should mean nothing. It almost broke her instead. "I hate that place. I hate it so much that just seeing the street name makes me feel as though I can't breathe." "All the more reason not to go." "I know, but I also know there may be something important there." Miles nodded. "There may be, which is why we won't handle it the stupid way." He opened his laptop and called a private investigator he trusted. Their exchange was brief and efficient, even to Evelyn's frightened ears. Surveillance setup, backup nearby, coordination with authorities if coercion or threat appeared likely. No scenario in which she would show her face at the meeting point. Only after arrangements were in motion did he turn back to her. "Tell me now," he said, his voice very low. "Why are you this afraid of that place?" She looked at him and understood that if she did not speak, that shadow would keep chasing her forever.
"I have a certainty," she said, forcing each word out cleanly, "that if I enter that place the way I did before, I won't come back out." He did not look confused. He did not look alarmed. He only asked, "What was the way before?" "Believing a liar, going alone, thinking I could manage it by myself." He nodded very slowly. "Then this time it won't be like that." She looked up. "This time," he said, each word deliberate, "you will not go alone." The next night Evelyn did not appear at the warehouse. The approach team did. Miles sat with her inside a car parked 2 streets away, both of them facing a live feed from a miniature camera attached to the operative's jacket. On the screen, the old warehouse came into view, peeling walls, rusted roller door, flickering exterior light, almost exactly as it had stood in her nightmare. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. The hand on her knee had tightened white with strain before she noticed it. Then another hand covered it, warm and steady. "Miles." He said nothing. He only left his hand there. Not romantically, not possessively, merely as an anchor, a firm reminder that she was in the present and not in the fire. The camera trembled as the operative entered. Muffled voices, a sharp argument, a flashlight beam sweeping the dark. Then the image caught a man dragging a small safe toward the side door. Adrian. He had come to move records and valuables before the place could be fully sealed. The anonymous message had been bait to lure Evelyn there, perhaps to threaten her, perhaps to frighten her into retreat, perhaps to force her into another signature. But he had not expected someone else to answer the invitation. When officers and investigators moved in, chaos burst across the audio feed. Adrian bolted through a side exit and was stopped in the rear lot. Inside the safe they recovered a hard drive, handwritten notes, loose contracts, and one draft document so familiar that Evelyn's entire body went cold. A responsibility acceptance statement. The wording was almost identical to the one in her previous life, only the date had changed. If she had gone there alone tonight, history might have repeated itself. Miles withdrew his hand slowly, as if he did not want to startle her. "You see?" he asked quietly. "Yes. Your instincts were right." She turned toward him, and this time she could not stop the tears. They fell hot and fast, not because she was weak, but because for the first time someone had just witnessed the most irrational terror she carried, the terror that knew its own death in advance, and had not treated it like madness. "I almost died there," she said, before she could stop herself. The interior of the car went utterly still.
Miles did not ask when. He did not ask, "What do you mean?" He simply looked at her for a long moment and answered in a voice lower than she had ever heard from him. "But you didn't." She stared. "At least," he added, eyes still on hers, "not tonight." Such a simple sentence, yet to Evelyn it felt like a rope thrown down into a ravine.
9. When the truth speaks. After the warehouse sting, the entire game board tilted. The hard drive contained an internal strategic plan for what they had literally called the brand engagement campaign. It laid out in chilling clarity the intention to use Evelyn's image and the Lin family reputation to raise market trust. There were live stream scripts, sample jewelry lists, swapped product codes, even prepared answers for customer complaints. One spreadsheet contained a single line that made everyone in the room go cold. If quality dispute emerges, prioritize shifting liability to independent appraisal function on partner side. Everyone knew who the partner was. At the authorities' preliminary press conference, Evelyn did not give a long statement. She stood beside her parents and Miles in a plain white shirt and said only this: "I do not represent perfection. I represent a clear attitude toward what is genuine and what is not. In the jewelry trade, a layer of plating can deceive the eye for a moment, but it can never hide the conscience of the maker forever." The line spread everywhere. Before long, people online had begun calling her the girl who exposed the fake gold. The nickname sounded almost ridiculous, but it did one useful thing. It made people remember that this time she was not the one humiliated in public. Mandy finally went quiet after several personal payments linked to fake seeding accounts surfaced. Claire stepped away from the company citing health reasons, but public suspicion followed her anyway. As for Adrian, he was released pending further investigation on some parts of the case, but his career was effectively ash. Whenever cameras caught him now, he no longer looked like the handsome prince of the jewelry world. He looked like a worn-out man with evasive eyes, exactly like the shell he had always been. That night, Evelyn and Miles sat in the garden behind the Lin house. Her mother brewed lotus tea herself and then left the two of them alone. "How does it look?" Evelyn asked. "Legally, there's more road ahead, but in terms of the larger position, you've already won." She looked down into her cup. "Funny, I always thought the word win would feel better than this." "That's because you aren't the kind of person who lives off the pleasure of stepping on someone else," he said, setting down his teacup. "When decent people win against something ugly, they usually don't feel triumphant, they feel lighter." She laughed softly. "You really do ruin every dramatic statement with common sense." "Do you dislike that?" "No," she lifted her gaze. "I like it." The reply came out too quickly, and she felt it. But Miles only sat quietly, the smallest curve of an expression appearing and disappearing again. After a while, she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been there at the engagement that night?" "Yes," he admitted. "And?" "And I think you would have found some other way." He looked at her steadily. "You're stronger than you think." Evelyn shook her head. "No, without you, maybe I'd still be strong, but I would have been very alone." Wind moved through the bamboo near the wall, making a sound like distant rain. Miles was silent for a long time. Then he said, "There's something I want to make clear." She looked up. "I began this as legal support," he said, holding her eyes. "But I don't want to pretend that for me it's still only work." Her heartbeat slowed, then stumbled. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly. He gave a short, soft laugh. "Good, because I'm not especially good at pretending." She lowered her eyes to the tea again. The surface rippled slightly because her hands were not entirely steady.
"But I'm afraid," she confessed. "Of what?" "Of clinging to the person who pulled me out of the mud and calling it love." She took a careful breath. "Of mistaking gratitude for feeling." He nodded as though he had already thought about exactly that possibility. "Then don't name it yet." She looked at him. "We don't have to turn everything into a promise right now," he said. "You've only just come out of a long nightmare. The first thing you need is not a relationship. It's a normal life." Her eyes burned. This man was strange in the best possible way. When her feelings trembled, he did not take advantage. When she was afraid, he did not press for an answer. Again and again, he put her safety ahead of his own desire. Perhaps that was exactly why her feelings for him kept growing, slowly, steadily, cleanly. "You know," she said, with the faintest smile, "the way you make people like you is incredibly unfair. And the way you make people notice you is dangerously effective." They both laughed. 10. The Gold Shop Under the Magnolia Tree. By midsummer, the Lin family reopened their old shop on Bank Street after modest renovations. No fanfare, no loud relaunch, no celebrity ribbon cutting. They replaced the old sign with a new wooden one, cleaned and expanded the assay counter, and added a small consultation corner where customers could bring in old jewelry for free inspection. The idea had been Evelyn's. "After what happened," she had told her father, "what the market needs isn't only products, it needs trust repaired." Daniel Lin had agreed at once. "Then do it," he said. "This shop was going to be yours one day anyway." On reopening day, an elderly woman brought in the wedding bracelet she had worn for 40 years because she worried its purity might not be what she had always believed. A young married couple came with rings bought through an online live stream. 3 office workers stopped by to ask how to tell plating from real gold with basic signs. Evelyn explained patiently to each of them. Sitting behind the newly polished glass counter, watching sunlight settle over real jewelry, she understood something she had not fully named before. What had hurt so much in her previous life was not only romantic betrayal, it was the fact that she had once allowed the fake to creep into one of the most sacred places in her life, the work her family had built honestly for generations. That afternoon, Miles arrived carrying a small potted magnolia tree and set it near the shop entrance. "A reopening gift?" Evelyn asked. "Yes. Other people bring flower stands. You brought a tree." "A tree lives longer." He looked down at the magnolia. "I like things that can grow with time." She touched one pale new leaf and felt her heart soften like light warming stone. After their conversation in the garden, they had not defined anything too clearly, but Miles began appearing more often. Sometimes he brought documents. Sometimes he had dinner with her whole family. Sometimes he simply stood at the front of the shop and watched her work for a few quiet minutes before leaving again. Never dramatic, never ambiguous, just consistent. Her mother noticed long before anyone said anything, and often smiled to herself. Her father, on the other hand, one evening looked directly at Miles over dinner and said, "If you intend to pursue my daughter, remember one thing. My family has no use for men who talk beautifully. We only have use for men who stand steady." Miles answered just as directly, "I understand." Daniel gave a short nod, temporary approval. News of the Zheng family gradually sank beneath the surface as the investigation moved into slower, less glamorous stages. Some punishments did not need shouting. Sometimes it was enough to watch doors close one after another in front of a person's face. One evening, Evelyn received a message from Nora. "I found a new job. The pay isn't high, but it's decent and honest. I wanted to thank you." Evelyn looked at the screen for a long time before replying. "Then live honestly for the part of yourself that once helped do wrong." That was probably the best ending possible for whatever connection existed between them. Not long after that, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was the engagement ring she had left on the glass above the fake gold bars. There was no note, only the formal release receipt returning personal evidence. She stared at the ring for a long moment and then placed it in a box and locked it away. Some things do not deserve to be thrown out, but they also do not deserve to be kept close to the heart.
11. The Festival Night by the River. That year's Lantern Festival turned the entire Ancon riverfront bright. The Lin family sponsored a small booth in the traditional crafts area because Anna wanted to raise scholarship money for students studying jewelry design and metalwork. Evelyn was occupied all afternoon and only escaped the crowd after nightfall. When she came down the stone steps toward the river, she found Miles waiting under a tree with 2 cups of peach tea in his hands. "I guessed there would come a point when you'd be thirsty," he said, offering one to her. "You make me sound like a child." "No, I simply observe well." They walked slowly along the water. Lantern reflections stretched across the current in ribbons of red and gold. Music from the main stage drifted through the air, just loud enough to form a background without swallowing their voices. "Have you ever felt," Evelyn asked suddenly, "that the life you're living now seems borrowed from someone else?" Miles turned to her. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I'm still afraid I'll wake up and find myself back in that old warehouse night, as if everything I have now is only a reward I didn't deserve." He stopped walking. In the red and amber lantern light, his face became serious. "Listen to me, Evelyn." His voice was low but clear. "What you have now was not handed to you out of charity. You held on to it. You held on through your choices, your courage, and the fact that you did not step back when it was time to step forward. Don't treat your present like alms. It's something you fought back." She stood very still. Her eyes burned. A lantern floated past along the bank below them, its small candle stubbornly refusing to go out. "You know," she said softly, "if I weren't afraid you'd think I was insane, I would have told you a long time ago. There are moments when I really feel as if I've already lived through losing everything once." Miles looked at her for a long time. Then he asked, "If that were true, would you regret coming back?" She stared at him. No one had ever asked her that, not even herself. She thought of her parents alive and well, of the records room untouched, of the shop reopened, of the magnolia tree outside the door, of ordinary afternoons spent helping customers inspect old jewelry, of his hand over hers in the car outside the warehouse. She shook her head. "No," she said, "I wouldn't." "Then that's enough." A very soft smile appeared. "I don't need to know what logic you use to explain it." Something in her let go completely then. Not because she was being believed without question, because she was being accepted even where explanation could not fully reach. River wind lifted a few loose strands of her hair. Miles reached up and brushed them behind her ear, slowly enough to give her time to move away if she wanted. She did not move. "Evelyn," he said. It was the first time he had said her name in that tone, not the tone he used when discussing evidence, not the tone he used when calming her, but the tone of a man who had thought carefully before allowing his feelings out into the open.
"Yes, I like you." Only 3 words, nothing ornate. Yet the whole riverbank seemed to go still. Evelyn looked at him and smiled, even as tears spilled from her eyes. "I know.
It was the first time she answered him with a different intimacy in her voice, without any awkwardness at all. His expression shifted, just one clear beat, then softened. "You knew and said nothing?" "I meant to," she said, laughing through tears, "but you were the one who said we shouldn't name things too early." "And now?" "Now I want to." He smiled then, fully, one of the rare times his whole quiet face opened. "Then say it. I like you too." Once spoken, the words felt light, like releasing a lock that had rusted closed. He did not pull her into an embrace immediately. He only took her hand and held it firmly, exactly the way he had done everything else from the beginning, without display, but in a way that could be trusted.
12. No false shine. By late autumn, the magnolia tree outside the shop had formed its first cluster of buds. Evelyn stood beneath the eaves one cool morning and inhaled the faint fragrance drifting through the air. It struck her then that her life had finally walked out of the season of fire. Not because every wound was gone, but because she no longer lived inside their shadow. The Zheng family case reached its first formal conclusions. Enough had been established to make one thing irrevocably clear. The primary responsibility had never belonged to Evelyn or her family. The damage to their name slowly began to heal. More importantly, her parents were still here, healthy, alive, and occasionally still arguing over whether dinner should be something simple at home or something different outside. One afternoon, Daniel called her into his office. On the desk lay Verity Gold Appraisal's internal transition ledger. "I'm getting old," he said. "You're barely in your 50s. "Still older than you." He gave a small huff, then looked at her with rare visible tenderness. "From now on, you take the lead on customer advisory and transparent brand development." Evelyn took the ledger in both hands. The weight of it felt warm and solemn. "I used to worry you were too soft. Now I know softness isn't weakness." That evening she told Miles while they walked through the park near her home. "Congratulations, Director Lin," he said. "Not quite. You will be. You believe in me that much?" "Yes," he did not hesitate, "because you're no longer afraid of what is genuine and what is false." Dry leaves whispered beneath their shoes. Evelyn thought suddenly of her grandmother's ring. She had kept it hidden in a drawer all this time and had never mentioned it to him. Now she slipped it from her coat pocket and placed it in his palm. "This," she said, "was my grandmother's. She told my father that if I met someone unworthy, I should keep it for myself. If I met someone sincere, I could pass it on." Miles looked down at the old gold band, and something in his expression gentled. "I haven't prepared anything," he said. She laughed. "I'm not proposing to you. I'm only telling you that I'm not keeping it for myself anymore." He closed his fingers over the ring and held it for a long moment. "Evelyn." "Yes?" "I can't promise I'll never make you sad," he said. His voice was calm, direct, and more sincere than any practiced vow. "But I can promise I will never turn you into a shield for my selfishness." Something in her chest hurt then, but gently. That was the promise she needed most. Not, "I will love you forever," in the easy way people say such things, but a promise that understood the limits of human beings and still chose one clear boundary that would never be crossed. No betrayal, no exploitation, no turning love into a tool. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. This time he held her tightly in return. Above them the park lights shone warm gold. Beyond them, Ancon glimmered with signs, storefronts, homes, and countless private stories. Somewhere in that city, surely, people were still lying. Somewhere else, beautiful things were still being plated to deceive the eye. But Evelyn was no longer afraid in the same way, because she understood something simple at last.
The most dangerous counterfeit is not dangerous because it resembles the real thing. It is dangerous because sometimes we are too hurried, too lonely, too unwilling to trust our own instincts, and so we place our hearts willingly into the hands of the false.
Once you see clearly, imitation shine loses its spell. Winter came slowly that year. The magnolia outside the shop opened its first bloom on a bright morning. Her mother cried out with childish delight. Her father stood under the eaves and declared that the tree must suit its new steward. Miles arrived at exactly the right moment, carrying a bag of still warm pastries, only to be met with Daniel's deliberately stern look. "You have too much free time, don't you?" her father said. Miles answered with perfect calm. "Yes, sir. I took the morning off to admire the flowers." Everyone laughed. Standing in the middle of that laughter, Evelyn suddenly felt the memory of the fire move one step farther away inside her. It still existed, like a scar that would ache when the weather changed, but it was no longer the house she lived in. Her home now was the place where her parents still breathed, where the family craft still lived, where lotus tea scented the evenings, where a magnolia tree stood outside the shop, and where a man in a gray shirt possessed enough patience to stand beside her while she looked directly at what was real and what was false. After everything, she understood this. Happiness is not being handed 1,000 taels of gold. It is not standing on a stage while strangers murmur in admiration. Happiness is being able to place something bright beneath the light, look at it for a long time, and say with complete calm, "This is real, and so is the person standing beside me." The end.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.